Estamos aqui com o Frank 4 na CCXP. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. I want to start talking about your beginnings. You chose an artistic name for your work because of your parents, right?
Oh yes, because of my parents, yeah. I started working on an underground comic, self-published. It was adult humour. And I knew my parents would not like it, so I made up a name, Frank Quitely, which is a spoonerism of Quite Frankly. But of course, after a while, I just told them what I was doing, but especially after we ended up in a local newspaper, but I had to tell.
Oh, okay, you have to tell me that story.
A newspaper turned up to interview us about the fact that we were making our own comic, and we got our photograph taken, and then I kind of had to tell them because all the neighbours were saying, "Well, we saw your son in the paper," you know. So oh, great, but they were okay, they were fine. And then of course I started working professionally, and but yeah, that was the reason for the name change in the first place.
What about your children? Do they like comics? Any of them will follow your steps?
All three of my children, they like to draw. The boys are 18 and 21. They're not very into comics, but they've read a few of my comics. They've read All-Star Superman and We Three, and they've read Watchmen. They've read a few kind of classic stories that I've recommended to them from other creators. My daughter, she's just 12, and sometimes she thinks she would like to illustrate books. Sometimes she thinks she would like to be an architect. Sometimes working in film. So I don't know if any of them will follow in my footsteps, but they are all creative. And my eldest is at Glasgow School of Art, but at the moment I think he's either going to pursue a fine art career or he's going to pursue his musical ambitions, because he's also a musician. So
one of your first creations was the greens, right?
Yes.
You even used them in a Batman story.
I did, yes.
And what happened to them? Are you planning something with these characters?
A few years ago I was approached by somebody at the BBC to write a pilot script for a Greens animation. For a number of reasons it ended up not happening. I then took the screenplay, the pilot that I'd written, and rewrote it and thumbnailed it as a regular comic story. So at some point I may well get that done. I hope to. I've also written a number of other short stories in the last few years. I wrote them all to be comic book stories, but some of them would lend themselves to be either live action or animation. There's actually one of them is being animated at the moment for a very short film.
Muito obrigado.
You made very few works for Fleetway, Judge Dredd. Most of the artists love to work with Dredd, the long runs. Why you did so short, so few works?
Well, when I started working for 2000 AD and Judge Dredd, I had been working in underground comics, and I was writing my own stories, and they were humorous stories. The guys at the local comic shop suggested that I did some samples of Batman or Judge Dredd or something and send them to publishers to try and get professional work. And the first editor who gave me work was a guy called David Bishop. He was the editor of the Judge Dredd magazine, which was a sister comic to 2000 AD. It was aimed at a slightly higher age group, and that was the first time I had worked from somebody else's scripts. I was also painting the work, so I was doing the penciling, the inking and the colouring, and I loved it, and I was getting paid.
Oh yeah.
Which is a big thing when you've been doing it for years and not getting paid. Getting paid's a big thing. I remember David Bishop, when I did the first story, it was a western called Missionary Man, and when I finished it, the editor said, "For as long as you want to keep doing this, I'll always give you another script to do." And I said, "I will be happy, if you keep paying me, I'll be happy to do this forever." And he started laughing. He said, "No, the Americans will come and knock your door and they'll offer you more money and you'll go off with them." And I thought, well, if that happens, it happens. And it happened just a couple of years later. So
who offered the money?
The first American was a guy called Andy Helfer, and he was from Paradox Press, and that was part of DC Comics, but they did the big books.
Yes.
So I think I did about 10 big book stories, and then it was actually an editor called Lou Stathis, who's passed away now. Lou was the first editor to invite me to do a Vertigo story, and that was Flex Mentallo with Grant Morrison. So it was great working working for in the UK market, but there was more variety in American comics. There was the black and white Paradox, big book stuff. There was the coloured non-superhero Vertigo stuff, and then there was the superhero stuff. So there was just more variety out there. And once I started working for the American market, I thought, yeah, this is good. I could keep doing this.
When you did Flex Mentallo, you didn't met Grant Morrison. Is that right?
No, I had met Grant Morrison, but I had only met him on a few occasions in Glasgow, because we both live in Glasgow in Scotland, and it's a small city and it has a small comic community. We all, every now and again, everybody would get together in a bar for a drink, and I knew Grant. I'd spoken to him a few times socially, but I had never read any of his work. I just knew he had a great reputation, and when I got the first script for the first issue of Flex Mentallo, that was the first work of Grant Morrison's that I had read, and I loved it, but I didn't understand any of the references. He would say, like, here's a kid that looks like Billy Bateson, and I would phone him up and say, who's Billy Bateson? And he would say, just draw a kid with a red and black stripy jumper like Dennis the Menace, who's a Scottish character. I thought, okay, I can do that. And even by the time I'd finished drawing Flex Mentallo, I only kind of got what it was about, and there was a lot of comic book references in it that I didn't understand. And when eventually they collected it as a book, I reread it, and it was the first time I had read it since I had drawn it, and obviously I understood the philosophy behind it better because I was older. I got the whole, like, Golden Age, Silver Age, Dark Age. I got all the comic references. It meant much more to me. I thought, I actually did quite a good job on that, considering I didn't understand what it was about. But Grant actually did say that one of the reasons that he had wanted me to draw that is because he knew that I didn't know much about comics, and he wanted me to approach it with that kind of naivety, because he believed it would work better that way.
You two both still live in Glasgow.
Yeah.
How's for you work with a guy that lives in the same city, and you can join him to drink a lot, and it's easier for the work?
Yeah, every time Grant and I have worked together, even on very short projects like New Toys, which was in a Vertigo anthology, every time we work together, it always starts either with a phone call or a face-to-face conversation. Once we decide on the project we're going to work on, we always meet in his house, in my house, in a cafe, in a bar, in a museum. We always go somewhere so we can sit down and talk, and often I'll start drawing while he's talking, and he'll draw as well because he can draw. It always starts with a collaboration, or like a conversation. So I think the fact that we live in the same city actually helps with that. Yeah.
How many inhabitants is there in Glasgow?
I think it's about 600,000. So it's not a big city.
Much smaller than São Paulo.
Yeah, a little bit smaller than São Paulo, yeah.
Why would you say your partnership with Grant is so strong?
As I say, when I read that first script of Flex Mentallo, that was the first of any of Grant's work that I had read. And the two things that struck me about it were that it was very well written and very well structured, and he totally knew what he was doing. And the other thing was that he was exploring themes like of philosophy and pop culture and the nature of imagination and the nature of reality that struck a chord with me. He was much better at describing that stuff than I was, but part of the reason that people are drawn to Grant's work isn't because it's overcomplicated or it's trying to be clever. It's because he talks about very ordinary things, like what it is to feel, what it is to be, and all of us have got these questions, and all of us have a philosophical side to us, and he's very good at striking a chord with people. And I felt that when I read his work, I felt that he was speaking directly to me. It's the sort of thing that I would have been writing if I had been better at writing, Part of it is, I think, the fact that we share quite a lot of common ground, but we're also quite different types of people, so it's both the similarities and the differences. when we collaborate that go together to make the work.
Would you say that the common ground helped you to work, I don't know, with Alan Grant, for example?
Yes, I think so. The first time Alan and I worked together, it was actually on a Lobo story that was never published.
I'm sorry, but I was going to ask you what happened to that story.
Okay. There was a couple of things that happened with it. One of them was that Alan actually, he'd been looking at my work and he approached me at a Glasgow convention, a very small Glasgow convention. And he said, if you ever want me to write you a Lobo story, just let me know. And I was laughing, I'll let you know right now. And he said, okay, well, what kind of story do you want? And I had just been drawing a Japanese sci-fi strip for the Judge Dredd magazine. And it was all laser knives and hover vehicles and stuff, and I was fed up with it. I wanted something that was really simple. I'd really enjoyed John Buscema's Conan when I was a child. I just wanted, like Lobo to be fighting people without all the weapons. So I said, could we do something like that involves hand-to-hand combat? And he came up with this really funny story, and the title of the story was The Hand-to-Hand Job. And for a variety of reasons, it was deemed inappropriate. I actually think he was at his best writing Lobo. I think that was, for me, for my personal taste, that's what I liked most about his work, more so even than his Shadow of the Bat work. But the Lobo work got canned and never saw the light of day. But after that, he told me that he had a great idea for a Batman story, and he had been reading a book about Freemasonry, and he had discovered that there was a chapel in Scotland near Edinburgh called Roslin Chapel, and this was before the Da Vinci Code. He came up with this great idea that Bruce Wayne went to Scotland without his cape and cowl, and inadvertently he stumbled upon this mystery that tied in that chapel and Freemasonry and the Knights Templar, and the pitch he gave me was fascinating, and I had to finish stuff off. So there was a couple of months before he had to get the script ready for me, and what he didn't tell me was in that couple of months, every time he sent the script into DC, the Bat editors were saying, we need him in this costume, we need a baddie, we need him to punch somebody, and every time he had to change it, the original conspiracy and the original idea got watered down, and he kept losing interest to the point where he actually didn't like it at all by the time he'd finished writing it. This is the Scottish connection. But he knew I was really excited about it because it was my first time to draw Batman, so he didn't tell me that he didn't like it. For years I had been drawing comics, underground comics, big books, and these are the sort of things when you meet people that don't read comics and they say, oh, you draw comics, what do you draw? And you say Flex Mentallo or 2020 Visions or the Big Book of Losers. It means nothing, but if you could say I'm drawing Batman, all of a sudden people are, oh really? So I was super excited about this. I got the script, read through it, I liked it, I did the best job I could, and it came out, and of course I gave a copy to my mother. The next time I saw her, I said, what did you read the Batman comics? She said, I did. I said, what did you think? And she said, your drawings were very good, but the story was rubbish. And of course, I ran away and grabbed the phone and I phoned Alan Grant and said, guess what my mum just said? And that's when he told me about how the script had been changed and he had to rewrite it so many times and he ended up hating it, and he said, you go and tell your mum she was right, it's the worst thing I've written. So, and it's the same with Mark Miller. I think if you come from the same country or the same town, or if you share some sort of sense of humour or you share cultural references or something, I think sometimes it makes it easier to collaborate.
You mentioned Conan earlier.
Yeah.
Would you like to draw him sometime?
Yeah, I would like to draw Conan sometime, yeah.
You remember the movie from Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Of course. I thought it was amazing. that scene in the forest where they all come through the mist, and they those helmets with I thought that was totally amazing. And do you know, I can't remember if I noticed that Arnie wasn't particularly good at acting back then. But I actually watched a couple of bits of that Conan movie on I can't remember if it was on the TV one time or if I looked at it on YouTube, but within the last year or two, and I actually couldn't believe how terrible it was, but I really loved it when I was younger.
you speak Gaelic, right?
No, I don't. No.
Speak a false Gaelic first. How it sounds?
That's what Gaelic sounds like. Do you know what? I'm going to go back home and like half of Scotland's going to throw stones at me for this, throw haggises at me for this. I've insulted my own culture.
In the late 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, you worked with the Justice League for Earth 2 and the X-Men books for Grant Morrison at Marvel.
Yeah.
What can you say about working with big characters all together? Is there any pressure?
I don't know if I would describe it as a pressure. The first time you get offered like a big character like Batman or a team book like Justice League or something that's at the top of the charts like X-Men, there's an excitement there just because you've got to a stage where you've been offered that kind of job. The reality of actually getting the script and reading it and rereading it till you understand it and making it work on the page, making it work for other people. The reality of actually doing that completely overtakes the excitement of the characters you're working with. You've got the same problems of storytelling and keeping things both interesting and dynamic and clear and simple at the same time. It's all the same balancing act, whether you're doing a book that nobody's ever heard of or like a big book like the X-Men or JLA. The only challenge that's significantly different about doing a team book is that very often when it comes to whether it's discussions or fight scenes, you're dealing with a team of people. It takes a little bit longer to work out the fight sequences, but these are really just practical differences.
How was for you to draw such complex pages as you did in Pax Americana?
Pax Americana was a very different experience for me than any other comic I've worked on, but also significantly than any other script that Grant has given me. Typically, Grant gives me scripts that are very simple. He describes what he wants in the scene or what he wants in the panel, and he gives me the dialogue, and he allows me to translate it whatever way I want. With We 3, it was the same way, but all the sequences that were very complicated, instead of trying to describe it, he'd just say, Vin, there's 2 pages here that are going to be really complicated and I need you to help me come up with something really new. So we just need to get together and talk about it. So there was no description in the script, it was just, we need to talk about this and we'll sort it out together. With Pax Americana, it was the first time that he had given me a script that was very, very prescriptive. It was very tight on detail, and for many of the pages, maybe more than half the book, he actually gave me very simple breakdowns, sometimes just the shapes of the panels themselves, sometimes wee arrows and stick figures telling me the way he wanted things to go. I know why he did that, but I actually found that quite difficult because normally when I'm trying to work out a sequence, I can kind of solve the problems any way I want, and because Grant was so prescriptive with what he was asking me to draw and sometimes showing me layouts that he wanted me to stick to, it meant that all my problem solving had to be done with a lot less freedom. It actually took me much longer than usual. That's kind of typical of Grant, where sometimes, you know, he'll change the way he writes the script depending on what he wants the book to be like.
About the script of Pax Americana, do you think Grant wanted to emulate the kind of script of Alan Moore in Watchmen because of the sense of description and all the stuff so rigid?
Well, Grant had mentioned that where Watchmen was a 9-panel grid, he wanted an 8-panel grid as a general template, and he talked about harmonics and music and all the rest of it, and I think it's he wanted me to do something that was a Watchmen-like comic, so he gave me something like a Watchmen-like script. You know, I've not actually asked him, was that you deliberately doing an Alan Moore style script the way you presented it to me so that I would work that way? But certainly the parallels in the story and in the approach to making the story, I think are quite obvious.
Other works are not like that. They're not so rigid.
No.
How you used to work?
Usually Grant gives me scripts that are with a full script, page 1, panel 1, you know, it's not like the Marvel style where it's just described. The next couple of pages is a fight scene and this happens and here's some of the dialogue. It is actually a full script. All the stuff I worked on with Grant is full script, but with we three, some of it wasn't scripted at all. It was just discussed face to face and worked on together at the same table, with me drawing and him saying, no, give me something I haven't seen before, give me something more original. You know, with the X-Men, they were full script as well, but after the first 3, he knew I was drawing the first 3 when we redesigned everything. He was writing scripts not knowing which artist was going to be drawing them. I think I did 10 issues of New X-Men, but they were dotted about. After I did the first 3, I then started working on one that wasn't coming out for another 6 months or whatever, you know. So those scripts I felt had a little bit more descriptive detail for what he was asking in the visuals than he would normally write for me, because he was just writing for anybody. Pax Americana, as we've discussed, was very, very rigid and controlled. Earth 2 was quite simple and kind of easygoing with a lot less, where he was telling me what he wanted and giving me a lot of freedom to do anything I wanted with it. Flex Mentallo had quite a lot of description in it, but I think that's because it was moving from one reality to another, from child's drawings to superheroes that seemed real in the comic, to the character Wally Sage when he was a child to when he was an adult. So there was a lot of description in those scripts. So yeah, I mean, he does tend to change the way he writes depending on what it is he wants me to do.
Do you think the proximity with the writer is important to the work?
I think it usually is. I think it often helps. But I mean, I did an 8-page Sandman story with Neil Gaiman for the Endless Nights book, and I never spoke to Neil before or after it. I just got a script that was actually written for Mobius, and it was the simplest script. It was all full panel pages with one inset panel, and it was such a simple script to work on. It was beautifully written, and it just in very few words it described the kind of image that he wanted, and I feel that story worked very well. And Neil and I mean, Neil comes from England and I come from Scotland, but we had never met and we had never spoken, and I still think that worked well. And I think the Offspring story that I did with Mark Waid,
yes,
I think that worked well as well. I wondered if maybe with the 2020 Visions, I wondered if maybe I wasn't the ideal artist for that particular story.
How do you describe your own work?
It's a combination of all my influences, all the artists that have influenced me previously, and it's a culmination of everything that I've learned as I've been working, because I'm not an artist who just stumbles on doing things the right way really easily. I use an eraser more than I use a pencil. I draw everything 2 or 3 times. I work out the sequences until I feel that they're working well, and I didn't used to do that. I used to concentrate more on trying to make the drawings look good, even when I was less experienced at drawing when I started out. I've got slightly better at drawing over the years, and I've got a lot better at actually telling the story. I've also been influenced by more and more artists. I used to only be influenced by artists who were older and more experienced than me, and now I'm influenced by artists who are younger and less experienced as well. So it's just a process.
Is there anything in your trajectory you regret?
No, not really. No, I think you have to go through the stages of doing projects that maybe don't suit you as well, or working in characters you're less interested in, or doing a run of covers that you had nothing invested in, or working with an inker and then finding out that working with inkers doesn't really suit you. And I would like to have coloured everything that I had done. I'd like to do the colouring myself. It's not practical. They don't pay me enough money for colouring. I've got a family to feed, so but there's no point in me saying, well, I wish I had coloured every story that I had done. If I had done that, I would have done half the amount of work, so I would have learned a lot less about the penciling, about the storytelling, about the sequences. So I think you have to just accept the fact that whatever your trajectory is, that's the way it is, and that's what brings you to this point.
For the last, we want you to send a message to our viewers. Any message you want. Don't need to be kind. They're grown up.
Okay. is this just to Brazilians in general, or is this to
anyone will see,
or is this to
including the ones who wants to kill you about the false Gaelic?
Okay, to all the Scottish people that I insulted earlier on with my fake Gaelic, I apologise. To all the Brazilians who have welcomed me in their country and treated me with more enthusiasm than I'm used to, thank you very much. And to any aspiring comic book writers or artists, do your best work all the time, because you're not going to do it a second time, and you'll get better faster, and it's the best advice I can give. Do the best that you can all the time.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.